All right.
I'm
Now,
so excited. I'm seeing some names, people I haven't seen in a long time. Great to see some of you. I'm so excited for this. We, yeah, I love working with teams. So it's fun to talk about assessments.
Amy
so,
and Amy and Charlie, it's Gordy. I'm on the phone, but I don't think you guys can see me.
oh, it's Gordy Curfey. So nice to see you. We can't see you yet, Gordy, but please put your name in so you don't appear as an Amy Bladen Chateau.
Well, I don't know if I can. I'm in the middle of nowhere, and
Don't
I'm
say it. I don't want to know what you're doing.
yeah, I'm I'm
We
I'm
we have
in
we
Blaze
have some
Orange.
we have
Gordy
some
is,
real team experts in the room. This is awesome.
thank you so much for coming, Gordy. We appreciate it. We'll mention you when we get to your tool. So, welcome everybody. Turning it over to Gail, our hostess with the mostess.
Hostess with the mostest. I'll be around with coffee shortly. Good morning, everyone. I think it's morning where we all are. If not, good afternoon. As Amy said, I'm Gail Anderson. I'm a colleague of Amy's, whom I've known and worked with for several years. Um, you're here, obviously, for the Leadership Live in 45 session, and you're going to be speaking shortly directly with Amy and Charlie, who are going to provide you with more information and insight to this world of assessments. And I think it's fair to say when we did this 2 months ago, it was a similar topic. It seemed to raise a lot of interest in why we're doing this again and bringing some new information, tools, etc., that you might want to look into for your own teams at work. So as you can see here in terms of our agenda, the idea is to make this interactive. We're going to spend about 35 minutes. That's a little longer than usual on the actual presentation of the topic itself. There's some very rich information that they'll be sharing with you. But please feel free to ask questions and make comments as we go along. There is going to be time dedicated at the end, a good full 10 minutes at least, to think about questions that you might have, share your own insights, share your own thoughts about the topic and what you've learned, and keep some conversation going. What we always do like to do is invite you to share in chat your name and email should you want to reach out to others whom you speak to today, or if they'd like to reach out to you. You might have some great insights, or you might share something about how you're using assessments in your workplace that they might want to speak to you about. So if you wouldn't mind doing that. And if you haven't already, as we mentioned before, due to a little bit of a glitch that we're experiencing this morning with Zoom, hover over your name. And when you see you have the little box on the right with the three dots, if you click on that, rename yourself if you are showing up as Amy Bladen Chateau. And that way we will also all know who is here and be able to share information with you after the program today. With that, let me turn it over to Amy
Thank you so
and
much.
Charlie. And thanks again, everybody, for being here.
I reiterate, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And as Gail said, continuing the fun on assessments, and we decided to focus on team assessments. Just really quickly, we showed you a little bit of a breakdown of how we looked at the categorization of different types of assessments. And by the way, this is just ours. There's lots of different ways to categorize assessments, but there are the styles assessments, and then a deeper dive, and those are individual assessments, and then deeper dive on individual assessments, which are personality assessments, and then 360s, which are multi-rater assessments on folks. So it's inside out and then outside in. And then there are the teams assessments. And this is what we're really focusing more in on today. So this is both the team leader and the team being assessed, but we're focusing on the whole team. And this is the intra-team behaviors. So we're looking at results on how the team is performing on skills and the gaps and inconsistency in the perceptions of the teams. And we will talk about a variety of different tools, and we will tell you our thoughts about them, but we'll be interested in hearing thoughts about what you have used the team's assessments for. So that's just really an overview, and I do have a tool that if you haven't seen it, I'll share with you about top 25 or so teams assessments that are on the market, and what we have looked at them, what their thoughts are, our thoughts are on their validity and their reliability and what their purpose is. Because last time we talked about assessments, we really focused in on it's the purpose of what you're using your assessment for, not the assessment itself. So with that in mind, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box, and let's just, somebody asks you, can you help me assess and develop my team? What is your first thought? And this is just the first thing that comes to your mind. And this is just to kick us off. I don't want to make this, we're just really curious what comes to your mind on this. And I cannot see the chat. So Gail, if you would just give us a rundown of what you see, what comes up as
I
folks are
will.
chatting.
Starting with, what is it that you'd like to assess?
Mm-hmm.
What are the headwinds and tailwinds facing the team?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, a good one. Tell me more.
Yeah,
Chris says, what seems to be the issue?
of course, Chris. Any others?
No, those are the ones we've seen so far.
Okay, so all scoping to go deep. Well, we have the experts on the phone right now, clearly, because all of the questions are, hey, let's go a little bit deeper. I don't know enough to know anything yet.
One more just came through. What are the areas of, sorry, I need to scroll up. Give me a second here. Let's see, what would you like to know? Yes, I'm happy to help. Let me scroll up and find a
What are
few
the
more.
areas of opportunity that would make your team more effective? Great one,
Thank
Courtney.
you.
Nice.
That was a great one.
Nice. So a nice
What do you
variety.
feel is lacking?
Nice.
What would you like to learn?
Nice. Oh, a good variety. Excellent. Okay, so nice variety of things, and you may have a lot of different reasons that you're hearing that folks want to develop their team. So digging deeper, why do you want to assess and develop your team? Make sure that there's a reason to develop the team first. So one of the things this leads into is when we first think about teams, there's imprecision in how we talk about teams, lots of different types of teams. And how we talk about teams aren't even always teams. Sometimes teams are groups, and we all look at them a little bit differently. It is complex, and the purpose matters, just like what we talked about last time. So just a couple of different fun ways of thinking about teams, but bike racing teams, so fixed roles, and success is execution that supports the leader, and they share the rewards. Swimming teams, they have fixed roles, but the success is the sum of the individual performances. So is that really a team, or is that a group? And then you have a rowing team, and again, it's fixed roles, and then the success is the coordinated group. So it's adding up the whole group together. And then volleyball teams, it's primary, it's not fixed roles so much, but the success is a collaborative response that all works together. So the sum is more than a parts. Charley, what would you add to this?
I would add that, I find just presenting this slide and asking the team, which are they most like, often brings up some pretty interesting responses, right? So, everybody wants to be a volleyball team where we're all fluid and flexible, but generally speaking, you've got, say, I work a lot with leadership teams. You've got teams where there's a head of sales and you've got your head of operations, right? Those are pretty fixed roles, but gosh, they got to coordinate a lot. And if I may, I'll just say a lot of times I get called in by a leader who's got that bike racing mentality in mind. He thinks everybody's there, and I use he loosely here. He thinks everybody's there to support his success. And, it's not always that way. There's often a bigger goal. So I don't know. We have a lot of fun with this. Yeah.
Thanks, Charley. Fine. Turn this one over to you.
Yeah. So Yeah, I want to talk about Tuckman's model, and many of you know Tuckman's. It's a well-known model about how teams progress. I've been a big fan of this since I started using it in the early 90s. Now, in the early 90s, I was working for Outward Bound. This was, in graduate school. And the goal of Outward Bound is to take a group of people, rank strangers, and prepare them to travel independently in the wilderness. So there's a skill component, but there's also the teamwork component. And it was very predictable how it would unfold over the course of a week or 3 weeks. Everybody come together and they'd be pretty nice to each other initially, right? You got that honeymoon phase. And then before you know it, somebody's getting irritated at somebody because somebody's not pulling hard enough, or somebody's being silly, or something's happening. And before you know it, there's a lot of conflict going. And eventually, knock on wood, they establish some norms and they start performing. But there's some nuances there. The most important phases here are really the storming and the norming phases. And here's how it works in the real world. Somebody gets irritated. Well, somebody gets irritated because they're getting into camp late again, and they're realizing that there's no norms for when we get up in the morning and how we get going. Or nobody listened to Jane when she was the one navigating and she knew the right answer, and we got lost. And so we spent 3 hours wandering around with our packs on, getting tired. And so we're getting to camp late again. Eventually, if it's a high performing team, they're going to come together, and they're going to come together around things like, how are we going to make decisions? Whose roles? What are the roles? How do we work together? What are the handoffs? And if you think about it, it's the same exact thing in the organizations that we work in the teams, right? You might have teams coming together because of M&A. Well, they have to sort out, they have to learn to know each other, understand their strengths and weaknesses, understand the roles. How are we going to work together? Who's in charge? What's your decision authority? What's my decision authority? And so I find this to be a very helpful model. And what we've found is that people call you and ask for help in developing teams really at two phases. One is at the very early days. They're like, hey, I'm trying to get a team together. Can you help us assess and find the right candidates to get onto the team? And they also call you when it's storming. Nobody calls you, by the way, when the team's performing, right? They call you because it's getting interpersonally hot. People are arguing and they can't seem to get through the meetings without like getting into conflict with each other. So when do you hear this? You hear this around storming phases. And what's your role when you get that ask is to somehow start to get the people to know each other, and to start to think about, how are you going to perform? What are the norms that you're going to have for performance? And that's where assessment comes in. Amy, add anything or move to the next slide? What do you think?
Nope, I got it.
Awesome. So what do we really, go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry. So one of the questions we ask at some point, and I would say that in the steady state, sometimes we want to ask the question, are we a high performing team? So we're asking that all along the way. And the question that we ask is, what is a high performing team? And a lot of research goes back and shows, this is actually Gordy's research that shows us, do we demonstrate sustained superior results? Do we have adaptability and resilience over time? And what is the increased capacity as a whole? Are we getting increased capacity as a whole? That is what research shows us a high performing team over time. So yes, they come to us when things are wrong, but ultimately, when you want to become more and more competitive, we want to beat the competition. We want to find out, what do we get to do to become lean and mean? We want to find out what we need to do to become more and more of a high performing team. And that is when we want to ask ourselves, well, what do we need to assess to find out what we need to do to get this right? So what we looked at, individual team members as the unit of evaluation, we were asking questions like, do we understand each other? Can we flex our styles? Can we enhance communications? Whereas when we're looking at high performing teams, we're asking questions about team culture and teamwork as a whole. So when we're looking at the team as a unit of evaluation, we're talking about structure, context, and the dynamics as a team as a whole. So individual team assessments are used to support a holistic look at the team. They can be used together. But when we're looking at them, there are different types of instruments that we have. Today we're focusing on the team instruments, but we talked a little bit about individual instruments before, like the DISC, the MBTI, the social styles. We didn't talk about it, but one of them is the TKI, which is a conflicts style. But one of the ones that looks at the team as the unit, like the whole team as the unit of measurement, and we're going to talk about today, is the Grippy and the Lencioni, which is the 5 dysfunctions of teams, which you may have heard of. We'll also be looking at the TAS, the Team Assessment Survey, which also is one of the only ones, I think, the only one on the market that looks at the difference between teams and groups. So this is you've heard of EQ, well, this is TQ, the team intelligence. And the Hogan actually has a teams, an actual measure of teams, not just individual. And Charley has a measure called the TEVS that we may not get to today, but it's a cultural look at teams. So this is what we're focusing here on in terms of high performing teams. Charley, anything to add there?
Yeah, what I'd say is that it's interesting to think about how people intervene into teams that are in the storming phase or coming together. There's sort of one school of thought that's like, if we could just get everybody to know each other a little better, we could do the DISC or the MBTI, people would understand each other better, it'd be a lot easier, right? And so that's kind of one idea for how do you build a team. Another idea is, let's look at the team and the teamwork. Let's look at what our team norms or our team culture is. And that's another way to look at it. Sometimes you do both, but I just kind of want to help us start to think about what are the categories of team assessments. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to talk about this idea of understanding team culture and teamwork, because it's got everything to do with moving people into establishing norms. So if you think about it, teams are interdependent and they have norms for coordination, right? So imagine, not to use too many sports analogies, but a football team, right? So they have norms and roles for how they're going to interact, right? And the linebacker's always a linebacker, the quarterback's always a quarterbacker. What's the role of the linebacker? Well, it's protect the quarterback, right? So these are how we're going to work together. They're rules or norms. And if you don't have that, imagine a football team where they don't have that. You just have everybody run around on the field, nothing will get done, right? And we see that. We see teams in business that are like that because they haven't established those norms. So the whole idea of most of these models, and I'm talking about Lencioni or the TAS, is really to how are we going to work together and getting people to get a clear vision of how we're working together, how it ought to be different, and making some commitments. That is the essence of this intervention. This intervention, this idea of assessing teams and developing teams is how are we going to work together? What commitments are we going to make to each other, and how are we going to hold each other accountable? That's really the essence of this approach to building a team. And let's jump into Lencioni and talk about that for just a second. So I love the Lencioni assessment.
Do not be busy.
The Lencioni assessment is all about interpersonal norms, right? So at the core, this is a model that talks about things like, do we trust each other? Do we build an environment that's psychologically safe? Do we have conflicts? Do we hold each other accountable? The idea being that you'll never, ever have a high-performing team if you don't have a trusting environment where people feel safe to speak up, essentially psychological safety. Because if you have that, then you can have conflicts and you can make, if we have space to talk and even argue with each other, we're going to be more committed, and then we can hold each other accountable, and ultimately we'll get the results. But I want to be clear, when someone asks you to assess a team or to help build a team, it's pretty important to think about what norms you want to establish, right? The Lencioni is a great assessment if your focus is on interpersonal alone. It goes very deep on that idea of interpersonal, but I want to present another way of looking at norms. Another way of looking at norms is to look more broadly. I'm going to present a very broad model of team norms, and that's the Grippy model.
Hey, Charley.
Yeah,
Can I just say something real quick about this?
of
I know
course.
we really hit on the idea of validity, and when validity is important and when it's not in the last session that we had. And I will mention and hit on it again, for those of you who are science types. This is a model and the tool itself is not valid. We wouldn't say it was a valid or reliable model, but if you'll remember, we talked about purpose. So when the purpose is to have a really good discussion and have a discussion that leads to results through discussion that gets folks to be vulnerable and have open themselves up in a way as a team that works and is beyond a simple team building. Oh, let's have fun. This model can be very good. And again, purpose is what matters. So does it have to be valid? Not if it's to stimulate a good conversation. So those of you who look at this and say, oh my God, as a scientific model, it's not valid. Remember what we talked about last time. It's the purpose of what you're doing. I just had to say that, Charlie.
All right, thank you. So jumping into this is a broad but not particularly deep model, if you will. And in a second, I'm going to give you a tool you can all walk away with. So I want to be clear about the GRIPPY, which stands for goals, roles, processes, and interpersonal relationships, is that it's all about really goals. I mean, social science is clear on one thing. If you want performance, you have to have a goal. And think about a sports team for a second. You're going to get tired of me talking about sports. Really, I don't even pay attention to sports, but you're never going to have a successful team if they don't have a goal of like, we're going to score high or we're going to go to the championship. And really, you got to have goals. And the same is true for teams. Okay, does anybody want a one question assessment for teams that you can always have in your pocket ready to go? Here it is. Have everyone, if you're doing a team intervention, you have a team together, virtual or in person, have everyone write down what they think is the most important overarching goal for the team silently, and then read them out. You know what you're going to find in most cases? The team does not have agreement on what the most important goal is. Think about that. You wouldn't get that with a sports team, but you would get that with a team in an organization. Now, it says something about our organizations and about leadership and team leadership if they don't have a goal, if they don't have close to the same goal. There's lots of reasons for it, but goal clarity is a great single item assessment of whether a team is set up for success, whether they're on their way, whether they have norms. The GRIPPY model kind of puts goals front and center, but oftentimes, as I mentioned, you get pulled into a team assessment because there's interpersonal conflict, right? You're in this conflicted situation, and so somebody calls you and says, "Can you help me with my team? My team seems to be stuck in this world of conflict. What's going on? How can we get out of it?" Well, the obvious thing to do is to go right to the interpersonal issues, but it could be that there's other reasons that the team is in conflict. For example, what if there's no clarity on decision making? What if it's not clear? What if it's not clear how often you meet? Or you don't meet at all? I mean, you're going to have conflicts if you don't have enough meetings to connect and agree on things, or if you don't have clarity on goals and how I am supposed to collaborate with you and how our departments will work together. And, goals we've already talked about that. So oftentimes you'll be brought into an organization to look at, into a team to look at interpersonal conflict. But in fact, I encourage you to back it up a little bit and say, hey, are there effective team processes? Do we have clear roles? And are we all clear on our goals? So that'll get you to a lot of, broadly speaking, the types of norms that you need to establish. Now, going the other direction, when you want to build an intervention, start with goals. What's this team all about? And then what are the roles? What positions do we need to be successful? Do we have all those roles filled? Do we have a sales executive? Do we have an operations executive? Do we have an innovation executive? Do we have, et cetera, et cetera? Are we clear on that and where the roles begin and end? Do we know who's the quarterback and who's the linebacker, or are we all trying to call the plays? And then get into what are our processes for working effectively together? And if you have all that, very often you'll find the interpersonal problems seem to evaporate and go away. So that's the GRIPPY model. I have a really simple assessment for this. If anybody wants it, just reach out to me. It's like 20 questions. I don't even have it online. do a quick survey. It's kind of, but it gives you a good sense of, are all those 4 categories, goals, roles, processes, and interpersonal relationships, how are they doing? Now, you're looking back at Lencioni for a second, it goes deep on the interpersonal, but there's other things that matter. Amy, what do you say?
I say we keep going. So, oops. So I am moving on to one of my favorite, and we have the author of this tool on the call with us, if he's not out in the country doing something that I hate. Team assessment, sorry, the TAS-3, or the TQ, the team effectiveness quotient, which I mentioned up front. This is the rocket model, and it's based on 30 years of research. Gordy Curfey and team developed this a long time ago to be a simple assessment that's based on, as you can see, the 6 parts on the inside of the rocket. It's one of the only tools that takes into account the context around what's happening in the team and the pieces of what's going on inside the rocket and the context around it lead up to the results. So it's a valid model. It's one of the only models that I've seen to date that is valid as well. Real briefly, and I'm not going to go through everything here, but it's very similar to some of the other models you've seen. It does incorporate all the pieces. It has the norms, as you saw in the focus of the GRIPPy. It also has, and in fact, one of the exercises that's attached to the TAS is the GRIPPy. It has the piece on what was the part? What did we say that was the Lencioni? It has the commitment. The commitment, was that the part in the Lencioni? It has a lot of the different pieces all in the categorized in the different parts of the TAS, but they all work together and build up to how you get results. So context, the team's purpose, which is the mission, the right people. Do you have the right people on the bus to get the things done that you need? Do you have the norms? What's the formal work process to get the work done? Do you get the buy-in? If you have everything in place but people don't buy in, you're not gonna get the work done. Do you have the resources? And a lot of times I tell people when they start saying, I don't have the resources, I often say, well, let's check on this, because I don't have the resources or the budget is usually a wah factor. So if that's the only thing they don't have, I usually encourage them to look at other areas. And then the courage. How do they manage conflict? Are they willing to speak up? That says a lot about the quality of the team and where they are in terms of being a high-performing team. And then finally, are you delivering? That's the ultimate. And I was working with a company, in fact, recently that had a great results, but then the different pieces of the team on the inside were very low. And you think, well, how's that even possible? Well, the question that they asked me, how's that even possible? Why does it matter? And I say, well, imagine if you were working much better all together, how much higher your results would be in terms of being a high-performing team. But that's not what usually happens. So essentially you have, and it's cute. You have the first stage, it's easily memorable. And that's the great thing when you have a workable model. You have your mission and talent, which gets you kind of aligned, and it gets between the job and getting it kind of off the ground. You get the norms and the buy-in, which accelerates you, getting it into orbit, and then the resources and courage, which get you the cruise control based on the team's resilience and working on itself. And all together, they work to get you the results. I don't know if Gordy uses that metaphor, but I do, and it helps people to really see how this all works together with the cute little metaphor. So Gordy, if you don't like that, I'm really sorry. But the hallmark of a high-performing team is reaching and exceeding expectations based on the results. What I love about this model as well, 2 things. One, it has the book Ignition, which has easy to use field exercises. So every different part, if you find out I'm low on resources and talent, you have 5 to 6 exercises for each of those parts, and you can work on it with your team. Secondly, it is designed to be self-working or turnaround. So you can show the team, hey, these are the areas that you need to work on, and the team can move on. They can work over the course of a year, they can work over a course of a month, but they can continue to work. So this is the only tool that I've seen in a long time that actually has not just what the issues are, okay, we have issues, but what can I do about it? How do I put action in place to fix it? It's 20-minute to take the tool. And then another really interesting distinguishing factor of this tool is that it tells you, are you a group or a team? It doesn't show it here, but that little thing on the bottom, the team effectiveness, all the way over to the right shows you that you're more of a team. All the way over to the left shows you more that you're a group. And we'll talk in a minute about why is that possibly important. And it's not that one is bad or good. It's that you want to know whether you're a group or a team. So it's a tool that I happen to really, really like. It's definitely valid. People gravitate to it because it's really, really easy to use. And it really points out in a very easy to resonate with way where you should work. And it aligns nicely with Charley's Tuckman model. So we got a problem, here's where it is, and let's jump in and attack the problem, know where it is, and put action into place. So it's one that I love. And been working with Ph.D. to use this, and he's seen a lot of results over the last 35 years. Another one that's on the valid spectrum is the Hogan assessment. A lot of you know the Hogan for individual assessment, but they actually have, and maybe you don't know this, they have a team assessment, which very similar to the individual assessment. It actually, some of the ones that you've seen with like the styles assessments, this is like a styles assessment for teams. And you can see the names that are in the third bullet down: results, pragmatism, innovation, process, and relationships. It categorized different types of teams into those traits. So you could see, well, where is my team making, how is my team made up based on these researched traits? So for example, I was looking at a energy team, and what happened was they came out really low on innovation, and they came out medium on relationships, really high on process, really high on pragmatism, and medium on results. So you might think, oh, well, if they're really low on innovation, well, maybe we should work on that. But when you think about the context of where of who they are as an energy company, you know, you take into the context, and they talked about it, and they said, well, innovation isn't a goal for us right now, but it might be in the future. So you can look at this just like you would a styles for individuals and decide, is this important? Is this important for our team? Just like you would if you were looking at a styles, a DISC or an MBTI, shall I say. But it's valid. And then it brings to light the strengths and the team culture. It works in contexts with individual Hogans. I did an individual Hogan for each person, and they discussed their individual Hogans and how they could work together, and showed their blind spots and derailers. And then we could also look at, you know, what did they need to work on as a team. And then Charley has this fun one to show.
Can we go back for a sec? Because I want to talk about my favorite role on the
Absolutely.
Hogan team assessment. So, you know, we've got these roles: results, pragmatism, etc. My favorite role in that group is the pragmatist. And it's interesting to think about teams and what it takes to have a successful team. But it's, you know, most successful teams have someone as a pragmatist, and it's not an easy role to be, because a pragmatist is someone that's interpersonally very direct and not very ideational, not very creative and open-minded, right? They're the person that's like, enough of this already. Let's just get some work done. That's just my favorite role. But Hogan's got this list of 5 roles, and they are developed just on the basis of their HPI assessment, the Hogan Personality Assessment. And then you've got the 2 other parts of the Hogan suite, the MVPI, which gets to values, and shared values are the culture of your team. And then there's the Hogan Derailers, or the Hogan Dark Side, excuse me, the Hogan Development Survey, the HDS, which gets to sort of derailing behaviors. And that's the one I want to talk about, because that's really interesting to think about a team, right? So think about a team, and it's got a lot of people on it. that are excitable, people that run hot and cold, people that show passion, maybe too much passion bordering on emotional volatility. Well, that's a tough team to be in, right? And so how do you work with a team like that? So what's the team's dark side? What are their derailers? Recently, there's been some conversation at Hogan, in full disclosure. I sometimes work for Hogan about triggering and how you can have kind of a domino effect. And I just wanted to plant this in your mind because it's a pretty interesting thing to think about. Imagine like someone on a team triggering somebody else on a team. And then somebody else gets triggered by that triggering on a team. Before you know it, you've got the whole team triggered. Has anybody run into something that felt like that? Here's an example of one that I saw. Chris has seen this. So I was working with a group of leaders. Most of them were engineers in a big global technology company. And there were a few people on this team that were both excitable and bold. So when triggered or when they get excited, they come across as really emotional, but also really arrogant, right? So they're like judging people and saying, I know the way, and saying it with a whole lot of force. But most people on the team were actually, like your typical engineer, a little skeptical, like how could this cause problems, and a little indirect, a little leisurely. So they go from being sort of agreeable to passive aggressive. So you've got this person or a few people that are triggering people to be skeptical and leisurely, to be distrustful and passive aggressive. It was a mess. And so we gave people the HDS and we encouraged them to talk about themselves when they weren't at their best, and revealed this kind of tendency to be triggered by each other. It's interesting. So just encourage you to think about the many ways that you can use assessments creatively to help bring teams along. And we love this domino derailer effect and watching that cascading mess that sometimes teams end up in.
Thanks, Charlie. So we want to have at least a few minutes for sharing. So wanted to share that we do have lots of resources that we will share with you. I will send this deck in the follow-up to this, but I have an information guide that some of you may have seen on many commonly used assessments, how to use them, how we rate them, are they valid, and more, which I will include again. Free introductory GRIPY assessment, that's what Charlie was talking about. I have an article on high performing teams, the TQ, which is Gordy's article. And you're welcome to ask us if you'd like to talk further on team development needs and what I'm going to talk about in a minute. The link here is to last month's individual assessment, Leadership Live in 45. And then over on the right side, Charlie and I are piloting a new concept, which is sort of like a, I don't know how to explain it. It's it's taking the best value of what you do in coaching and strategy / high potential development, and we're condensing it into a small program for senior leaders, and we're going to be piloting it in the months of January and February, and we are just telling folks about it now, so we're happy to talk to folks further. Charlie, why don't you give a tiny little introduction to that? We will talk further, but Charlie,
30 seconds or less. We see the most value in coaching a lot of times in the assessment and then the original planning piece, getting a little peer coaching. And that's what this program is all about. You would get Amy and I as a Hogan coach, and we would move that into a very short 2-month curriculum where you start to explore different ideas that come up from your assessment results and build your leadership. This is not an infomercial. That's just what we're thinking. And we would love anyone's ideas on it, because we're baking it up and we are learning as we go. So
okay. So with that, thank you very much, Charlie. Here is some questions that we are just throwing out there, and we don't just have to talk about these, but we thought about what about measuring forming, storming, norming, and performing, and what phase do you think? How can you measure what phase you're in? How do you distinguish between groups and teams? And what do you know of in terms of other valid, reliable, or not valid and reliable, but really useful for conversations, teams assessments? And with that, I'm going to throw it out there for a conversation.
Amy and I've been talking. What have you all been thinking?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot.
Well, I want to jump in with a question. In the case of several teams that as I worked a lot in my profession in the technology and biopharma world, where you had a lot of really good personally accountable, results-oriented kinds of people that were conflict averse. And so when you started doing, teamwork with them, what you started uncovering was, all the hidden agreements not to talk about this and not to talk about that. Is there wisdom in taking them into the, storming phase, to get them back to ground zero where they can start doing some honest work?
I'll answer that. I think so.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll ever deal, high individual contributors that aren't actually getting to how they disagree often aren't able to form together as a team, right? They have to get back to storming, and maybe there's some way that you can sort of elicit that. Maybe it won't be like full-fledged screaming at each other. I'm not one of these guys that believes in primal scream therapy, but you know, I think there's an
And it,
opportunity to say, who's making this decision? When is so and so stepping on your toes? But I'm not the kind of guy that just stirs a pot for the heck of it. I think you're driving towards norms and what can we agree on how we're going to work together. It might be a more subdued kind of storming in that kind of group.
Yeah, I mean,
My
it's
opinion.
actually one of them was was using Taz on, and they actually scored really well, relatively well, on results. Because they were all individually driven, but there were no norms and no buy-in with each other. It was just sort of like broken at the foundation, and we were able to get into the dirt with that. So, I just wonder what your opinion was on that.
I'd love to hear from others. There are consultants that have these kind of team building sessions where they're like, what do you hate about this person? And I just think that's destructive personally. But anyway, Enos, what were you thinking about?
Hi everyone. So I wanted to, I suppose, ask a question. I was taking this conversation maybe in a slightly different direction. So I'm really curious about this intersection between the work you're doing on team assessment and that particularly in a sort of cross-cultural setting. So what's the sort of wisdom and experience in meshing those two sort of elements?
That's such a good question.
Well, and for context, I think Enos works in a Japanese company, that not to reveal too much about anyone, but the norms for a sort of coordinated action and dissent are pretty different. My sense of it, having worked at U.S. companies, US based companies that are kind of global, but in Japan, is that they really struggle getting people to, they struggle with their teams to get those teams to establish their own set of norms, as opposed, which might include global employees, as opposed to sort of adhering to Japanese norms, right? So that's a very strong culture in Japan. So how do you get, people that are, coming from South Africa and Europe and the United States to work in Japan and one leadership team? How do you get them to have dissent, sort of Silicon Valley style of, we're going to debate and come up with the best solution? It's
I'll chip in there too. That's so interesting because when you have a cross-cultural issue, that's where I think a team's intervention like this is so critically important, because that's where the talking, whether it's a Lencioni or a Taz or whatever, that's where the buy-in and the issue of commitment and trust becomes so important, because people need to talk about what they're feeling and talk about, well, hey, I see it like this, and someone else can say, well, I don't see it like that at all. And that may be an opening for folks to at least come out and say what they're actually seeing for the first time. So I think it can be, I don't know if I'm answering the question, Inez, but I know, not to reveal too much, but I know we've talked about the benefits of maybe, you know, the team communication being so incredibly important, and getting, you know, I think that's the work of change that has to happen when two very different cultures come together. So I think team assessment may be part of a change process.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting nuances is, even perhaps as you sort of think about team intervention, you know, because we're talking about open, honest conversation
Right.
as being this sort of channel to leading, you know, to better ways of working. And I suppose, you know, cross-culturally, there's also nuances in terms of that directness. So it's just an interesting sort of thought question. I was just curious about some of the experiences in the room.
Amy, I'm trying to raise my hand. My Zoom has been updated, and I think they lost my digital hand. I can't find it.
Oh, jump in.
Well, Ines, I'm wondering, the focus here today is on assessment, but there are other kinds of work that may need to be done in cross-cultural context, you know, before getting to the assessments. Like, you know, communication is key, cross-cultural communication, so that when the assessments are done, people have the skills to actually communicate constructively about the results from the assessments and where they go from those results. So I don't think any assessment can just be, you know, can just come in cross-cultural context and say, hey, here, you know who you are, you know how you work together, now move forward. I don't think it works like that in cross-cultural context, in fact, in any work environment.
Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And I think there's two kinds of team situations when you're talking cross-culturally. In the case of what you know you were talking about, Inez, with a Japanese company with an American operations. You know, you have two cultures there, but I worked with a team of research engineers who were 6 people from 6 different countries, 3 of whom were mortal enemies of each other and wouldn't even speak or share their information on their research. I mean, we're talking like Russia and Israeli, you know, and people that really just that like they total distrust. So, you know, you can have a small team where there's an intercultural issue on the team itself, or you can have a team of you know, company within a company or within a culture that present a different type of even the definition of what team means to a Chinese company or an Indonesian company or Japanese company are completely different definitions. So, you know, it's really important, as Amy and Charley are pointing out, to really get into the conversation at that point about what does it mean to you to be a team? You know, and what's it mean if is it time that we're just a group? You know, Amy, maybe you could just point that out. You know, like what is that distinction, so that you know, like it's okay to be a group when you're doing this.
I'd love to, but I am looking at our time, and I
Our
always
time.
promise that we will be, I will put a follow-up in that's my commitment to this group. I'll put a follow-up on what is a group in our follow-up, but I'm afraid we need to end because we never run behind. And this has just been such a good conversation that I'm gonna let Gail close us.
Well, with that, of course, thanks everybody for being here. It's been great to see you all. As you know, these are offered every 2 months. So we won't be seeing you again to the new year. So with that, happy holidays to everybody and have a great new year. And if you have questions that were not answered or you'd like additional information, of course, reach out to Amy and or Charlie. They'll be happy to help you with any questions that haven't been quite fulfilled. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining. I will leave the deck with you. It has my address and Charlie's, and you can ask us questions, and we are recording the session, so we'll give you a link.
Thank you.
How do I stop the recording? Oh, there it is.